What's up, everyone? I am Den. Welcome to my channel. And today I am providing an impromptu lesson in product management that I thought I would shelve for some time, but the current events forced me to do it today. So here it is. One of the things that happened today is that Twitter, that big social network company, announced that one of their features that they have been touting for the past couple of months is shutting down. So if you haven't read the announcement yet, it's probably worth going to the Twitter blog and reading it, but Fleets, or Twitter Stories, is going to be no more starting August 3rd. And so with that, you might think, okay, what the heck is the product management lesson here? Well, just hold on for a second. We're gonna get to it. The gist of it is that now everyone and their grandma is gonna come out of the woodwork and they will tell you how they knew right off the bat that the failure of this feature was inevitable, that from the very beginning, from the very first day, it was bound to fail. So of course they're shutting it down, right? Because we as humans are really good at predicting what's gonna work and what's not. Like, after all, we thought that nobody's going to pay a bunch of money for goofy headphones that look like some mushrooms, but yet here we are. But I digress. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is the product management angle on this whole situation. And again, you might be wondering that there is not really a lot to learn here, and I beg to differ. I think one of the areas that it's worth paying attention here, and especially if you're a product management early in career or maybe not, is the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is fairly simple. It just means that you are continuing to do something that is clearly a bad idea, whether it's a decision, a specific commitment that you might have made, and despite even the fact that you might have evidence of the fact that it is a bad idea, you continue doing it. You have that commitment bias. And what that means is that the more you prolong this decision, the more you prolong this endeavor, the more you're going to be losing. The way I like to look at this is through the lens of somebody that is gambling at a casino. And say they spent $1, $10, $100, and they continue losing more and more money. But now for them, it's too late to pull back because they think, well, hold on a second, I spent hundreds of dollars. Be ashamed to say that I just wasted this money. So I'll continue playing in the hopes that I will win. When in reality, there's no prospect of winning in the future because it's completely independent from the length of play or the amount of money spent. Think of it the same way if you would have taken a car ride to a concert in the middle of a snowstorm. Because you paid $100 for those tickets, but you're gonna spend $200 to get where you're going, risk your life, and potentially struggle with parking in a jam-packed city in the middle of a snowstorm, and even risk the concert cancellation. But this is where that sunk cost fallacy comes in, is because you're thinking that you've already put so much money into this that you can't just abandon the idea. So in the product space, this is more often than not represented by failing features. And you probably all have heard or have seen or even have experienced this situation. I know I have. It's when you work for weeks and months on end on a specific feature or component or maybe an entirely new product. And you're excited about it. You know that this is something that you want to get in front of your customers. You just have that instinct that this is going to be the greatest thing ever. So you put a lot of effort into it. You get those partnerships, you get the budget allocated, you negotiate with your engineering team to get plenty of resources put to it, and you're working very, very hard to make it happen. You spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, whether it's your money if you're building a startup, or maybe it's your company's money if you work for a corporation. But ultimately, you put a lot of effort into it. So you get your hopes up. And then you run an A/B test, and then the data is inconclusive, but then you just push ahead and say, you know what, whatever, we'll just ship it and we'll learn. And you do ship it. You do ship that feature. You get it out in the wild, and you get a press cycle. TechCrunch picks it up, and if Silicon Valley, the show, taught me anything, is that TechCrunch always picks those stories up, and you end up being very famous for that short amount of time while that feature is released. And then the press cycle just kind of slows, and you realize that customers aren't really using the feature that you've built, or maybe they're not using it in a way that sustains your business and you're losing money on it. But because you've established that initial anchor, you've partnered with so many teams, you've spent so much money, your instinct is to say, I'll just continue doing this and hopefully this will grow in the future. But it just doesn't grow and you continue losing money. Somebody needs to support that feature, somebody needs to maintain it, and you essentially dug yourself into a hole. And this sounds very comical, but the reality is that very risk-averse organizations, or organizations where there are misaligned incentives, this is very common, where folks ship features because they are excited, they will put them on their resume, they'll put their performance reviews, and just seeing something being pulled back is considered a failure. When in reality, it is not. It's not a failure, but it is seen as such because ultimately, isn't that affecting your future career if you can't tell that you shipped successful features? So this brings me back to Twitter and the concept of fleets. Well, they announced the feature back in November, and there was a lot of fanfare around it, that everyone was very excited, right? Because ultimately, Twitter just released, as they called it, a new way to join a conversation. So it was an exciting day, it was an exciting release, but I think that the more time went by, Twitter realized that it's not quite as successful as their competitors. For many reasons, and mainly maybe because the Twitter audience has different incentives than, say, the Instagram audience or the Facebook audience. And that's okay, that happens in every product. But think about it. When Twitter came out with that feature, they probably established a bunch of partnerships. They spent a ton of money on marketing probably. I don't work at Twitter, so I don't know the exact numbers. But if I had to guess, I'd probably have to guess that there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on getting this feature out the door. The engineering effort, the design effort, the effort on maintaining the infrastructure and building new infrastructure for something that is completely foreign to Twitter. The costs were high, so the natural instinct would be to say, you know what? No, we'll just keep pushing it because we already put the feature into the app. But what they did right is two things. One is they pulled back early, and two is that they actually told us why. And that's not a lot of companies do that. So Twitter is actually not the first company to ever sunset a feature or a product. That happens all the time at any company, any startup, whether it's an enterprise or a healthcare company or an educational company. At some point, you just realize that something doesn't work out and you need to pull it out of the product, and that's okay. And it's very easy to blame the fact that a feature failed on the fact that there was not enough planning, or that the design did not consider the right research. But the reality is, in any product team, and you as a product manager should know that, is that you're always operating with incomplete data. Think about the scale of a product like Twitter. They're operating at a global scale. There is hundreds of millions of customers around the globe. There is no way that before you release a feature, you can survey all of them or run an A/B test that is 100% conclusive that tells you whether the feature will be successful or not. As somebody that ran a bunch of A/B tests before, I've seen numerous cases where the A/B test is very positive, but then the feature itself is not. That happens a lot, and that happens because, again, we're operating in an environment where there is incomplete information. We're making a lot of assumptions, which brings me to this point. The longer you are maintaining something that is clearly failing, the harder it's going to be to shut it down later. Because, again, the sunk cost fallacy, it will only calcify the longer you wait. That is because the longer you wait, the more money you spend, the more effort you put into it, the more people are involved in that project. And it's going to be that much harder to convince people to stop investing in it when everyone else on your team will look and say, hold on a second, look how much effort we are pouring into this. So it takes a lot of force to counter that initial inertia of saying that, okay, we put so much, but now we're stopping. But keep that in mind. Because if you see that something is failing, it's way better to stop it early and just absorb the cost and say, this is what it means to learn. Because at the end of the day, that's what it is about. And the second part that I called out that Twitter is doing right is they are just telling us why the feature failed. And this was a refreshing blog post to read, just purely from the perspective that it was clear that Twitter realized what I thought that I saw, and I thought that maybe I was the only one that saw this in fleets, but people would effectively rehash their feeds. And I know that I've been doing the exact same thing. My logic was, if I tweet something, it's only visible for a short amount of time, but if you put it in a fleet, people can see that through the day. So naturally, that behavior emerged, and it's entirely possible that Twitter just did not anticipate it. Again, back to the point of incomplete data, you can see how this keeps coming over and over again, but it is true. There's some behaviors that you just cannot predict until you actually release the feature. So, what's the moral of the story? Test often and test early, of course, stands. The second one is, when you realize that something is failing, the sooner you stop, the easier it will be to stop, period. And the third one, just tell us, the customers, what happened with the product and why certain things are going away. It would be a vastly different story if Twitter came out and said, fleets just did not align with our vision. Instead, they just put a bunch of bullet points that tell us exactly what failed and what they're going to be doing next, and that's okay. So I hope this is useful. As product managers, be aware of the sunk cost fallacy, because it will come to bite you if you're not paying attention to it. Consider the fact that you're not operating with complete data, and I will see you in the next video where I'll be discussing more product management stuff. Until next time.